Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start Science Explorations 9 Ecology Unit, and we're going to title this initial video, The Earth, Human Activity, and Sustainability. Really what I want to address with this video is why should we care? And as you know from elementary school, there's a lot of concern today about ecology, the environment, and what humans are doing to it. The Earth is in a state right now where there's a massive human population of 7.5 billion people, and we are starting to have a very serious impact on a variety of things on the Earth, and we're going to look at that today. If you look at the Earth as an object, we tend to think of it as enormous and that we couldn't possibly have any impact on it. In reality, when you look at the Earth relative to the rest of the solar system, the Earth is a tiny little rock that's hurtling around an enormous nuclear furnace that we call the Sun. And when you look at it that way, you realize that it is the only place in the known universe that we know of that harbors life and can support life. And so we have to look after it, and we have to look after this place that supports us in a selfish way. So if you want to really think about how tiny the Earth actually is, if you take a look at a volleyball, and I chose a volleyball because I think everybody can kind of envision one. If the Sun was a volleyball, you would have to make a model of our solar system by taking the Earth as the ball from a ballpoint pen and holding it 22 meters away. So you can imagine us drifting around in space on that tiny little ballpoint pen ball, and you realize that we don't have an enormous home, and we really should look after this. Another way of looking at it is life exists on the surface of the Earth. As far as we know, it doesn't exist terribly deep into the crust of the Earth. And if you look at where life exists, you can see a good representation of how thin our region where life exists is. If you look at the cross-section of an apple, the skin of an apple is approximately the same thickness as what we call the biosphere. And the biosphere is the region on Earth where life exists. And so we think of it as a sphere on the surface of this rocky planet that we live on called Earth. And it's only, relatively speaking, the thickness of an apple skin relative to the rest of the apple. Why should we worry? Why should we care about Earth's sustainability? And I guess the easiest reason is that we get a lot from Earth's ecosystems and from the biosphere. So for example, we get oxygen. The oceans are full of algae, blue-green algae, that produces an enormous amount of oxygen and absorbs an enormous amount of carbon dioxide from our atmosphere. And without them, we wouldn't have the 19% roughly of oxygen in our atmosphere. In addition, ecosystems provide us with water purification. So freshwater systems on Earth purify our water and allow us very remarkably clean, fresh drinking water. We also get food and clothing and building materials and medicine. And basically, we get stuff from our ecosystems. We get lumber. And if you're wearing a pair of jeans today, jeans are made out of cotton, which comes from living organisms. We also get storm protection. So erosion control, forests keep soils in place. We get storm surge protection. Mangrove swamps protect coastal cities from hurricane surges. Flood reduction. Any wetlands absorb rainfall and don't and prevent it from flooding our cities that are in the area. And in addition, we get aesthetic and cultural inspiration. And when you walk out in nature, it's proven that humans just feel better when they get a chance to be in a natural environment or a natural ecosystem. And besides that, life is just amazing, and we don't know any other place on or in the universe that life exists, and so we should look after it. But we're not. There's a number of different things that we're not doing particularly well, and our activities are impacting Earth's ecosystems. Let's take a look at 5 main points, and each of these are very interrelated and can be expanded. So the first main thing that humans are doing on the earth is we're being too many of us. So overpopulation. There's about 7.5 billion humans on Earth, and that population continues to grow incredibly quickly. And in fact, every other one of these points is related to the fact that overpopulation is allowing us to have this enormous footprint on the Earth and cause all these other issues. Pollution takes many forms, and there's many issues surrounding pollution. So one of the biggest ones right now is CO2. We like to burn fossil fuels because it drives our cars, and it does a lot of things for us that makes our life very easy. However, what it's doing is changing our atmosphere, trapping more heat, and causing climate change around the planet, which leads to desertification, which leads to melting ice caps at the polar regions of the Earth, which is related to, as you can see down here, habitat destruction for a variety of different organisms. Other pollution related to the ozone layer. This is a massive problem. When you take the ozone layer out of our atmosphere, you end up adding more ultraviolet radiation to the surface of the Earth, which is causing more problems because ultraviolet radiation can burn animal tissue and plant tissue and cause massive problems there. Pollution also takes the form of plastics, and we're seeing a huge amount of plastics being injected into our oceans, and they're washing up on our beaches. They're being ingested or eaten by animals in the oceans, and it's causing an enormous problem on a microscopic scale as well as what we can see here on a beach. Disrupting natural chemical and nutrient cycles. So fertilizers that we use to produce our food are being injected into freshwater ecosystems and the oceans, and they're causing algae blooms. We're going to talk about this a lot in the future. We're disrupting a number of other chemical cycles that we're going to look at in a lot more detail. As I mentioned before, habitat destruction, either through deforestation, through desertification, causing deserts to be where they weren't before because of climate change, or just melting polar ice caps due to carbon dioxide in our atmosphere and climate change. There's a whole host of places in the world where habitats for organisms are being destroyed and ecosystems are being destroyed. And finally, movement and alteration of species. So movement of species is an issue with invasive species, which we will look at in detail, but also alteration of species. When we have genetically modified organisms, the impact of these on the environment is currently quite unknown, and perhaps we should be a little bit concerned about the release of some of these organisms into, I guess, what you'd call the wild. So let's write down GMOs for genetically modified organisms, and we will look at those in more detail as well. So this unit is based around the concept of sustainability, and we need to know what sustainability means. So ecological sustainability relates to the characteristics of a healthy ecosystem that allow them to exist for a long period of time. So if an ecosystem is sustainable, it is balanced, it has natural nutrient and chemical cycling within it, and it has the right amount of energy flowing through it. And we're going to look at ecosystems a great deal in this unit. Sustainable use of ecosystems is how humans use an ecosystem for resources, for recreation, in such a way that it is not impacted or that it doesn't harm the health of the ecosystem and its sustainability. So even though we are in the ecosystem and even though we use the ecosystem, we are still able to have an ecosystem long into the future without destroying it. And finally, let's talk about sustainable yield. This relates to the amount of resources that we can take out of an ecosystem without damaging the ecosystem. Fortunately for us, organisms will reproduce many more organisms than can naturally survive in an ecosystem. And if we harvest only the excess number, the populations of organisms in ecosystems will not decline. And this is called the sustainable yield. It's the amount of resources, fish or trees, that we can take out of an ecosystem without threatening its health or its long-term survival.